What up, though? It is your boy Mike D, host of Wrestling from the 313. And we got another, this is our second episode this week. Yesterday, we had Ian Douglas on the show. Great episode. If you didn't get a chance to watch it yesterday, make sure you go to YouTube and check it out. But today, my guest is a Michigan native. He's from Grand Rapids. He's a former board operator and executive producer, and he's a wrestling fan like myself. Sean Rodriguez, what up, though? Welcome to Wrestling from the 313.
First of all, Mike, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully we'll have some fun and go into some fun things and talk about wrestling.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. We definitely going to get into some wrestling. Before we do, want to say that this episode is on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And it is also brought to you by the WSN Wrestling Society Network. Make sure you download the app on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire Stick. Check out the app. A lot of great wrestling content from cartoons, documentaries, movies, anything that's pro wrestling. They got it on there. So make sure you check them out. And shout out to the WSN fan. So, Sean, before we get into some wrestling, I know you told me that you were worked at a radio station. So, what originally got you into broadcasting, and what kept you passionate about it?
So, what originally got me into broadcasting was funny story that we're talking about this. You know, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler. Growing up watching those guys talk on, on Monday Night Raw and on, all the different pay-per-views and things like that.
Yeah.
As I got to be older, I started to realize that I wasn't as big as some of these guys. I've always wanted to be a pro wrestler, but I knew I was never going to be as big as these guys. These guys are 6 foot 7, and I'm 5'6" and about a buck 80. So, and that's on a good day. That's on a heavy lifting day. But I knew early on, as I started getting into high school, that I was a good speaker. I always was a you know, a well articulated person, and even for my age range when I was, growing up to being a little kid. And I thought, well, you know what? That would be really cool if I could be the next, Jim Ross or the next, Michael Cole at the time was still really young. If I could be one of those guys, that would be awesome. And that way I have a front row seat to, every wrestling event. Well, it turns out, life has a way of, giving what you want out of it. And so
Yeah.
I ended up becoming an assistant producer and an intern for a local radio station here in Grand Rapids. And I did that for about 3 years, and it turned into a beautiful career. So that's kind of my journey.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So, what was a typical day like behind the scenes at the radio station in Grand Rapids, and do you have any memorable moments or guests from your time there?
So I worked a lot of the time. I worked for free. I worked almost 6, 7 days a week just because I was trying to break into the business.
All
And
right.
so a typical day usually comes in. It depends on what time and what events are going on and what we're doing. For the most part, during the day when I would come in the morning, it'd be a lot of show prep. For Bill Simonson, the huge show. He airs weekdays 3 to 6 all over the state of Michigan. So if you listen to him, shout out to Michigan Sports Network. And hey, Bill, if you ever catch this, so typical day would be going in kind of recapping the events from the night before. If it's like the summertime, we talk about the national kind of spotlight of what you know Michigan sports, what local sports are kind of doing. I know Bill would take a lot of time off in the summer, and that's obviously 'cause it's the slowest season in the world for sports. But a typical day would be coming in, kind of doing some show prep, kind of building out how the show's going to look, calling agents and talent talent representatives of who you want as a guest on the show. A lot of times, Bill would kind of already have done that portion. Other times, we'd pivot and I'd have like a almost like a book of let's get Jeff Risden on, let's get Coach Jane Campbell on, let's go get it wouldn't be actually Coach Jane Campbell, but you get the idea. It'd be calling the representatives, and there's like a book with all their names, and flip the phone on and make, hey, this is Sean Rodriguez from WBBL. We got an opening at 3:45. You want to come on and talk? About 10 minutes with Bill Simonson. It most of the time was usually a no, just because of time constraints. But every once in a great while you had to pivot, and that's kind of what the beauty of live television is. You just have to pivot and make sure you make that product entertaining.
Right, right.
So, during the show, we kind of run the show. I'd make sure that callers would stay online. I'd, kind of screen them, and then make sure I was taking highlights, making sure highlights are being played back, kind of integrating everything into our system, making sure that, for the 6 to 7 o'clock hour locally in Grand Rapids, that we replayed the hour if it was like, a slow sports day, or that would be when I was doing the executive engineering stuff. Now, when I was doing the board operating stuff, it was more of, hey, come in about an hour before, an event starts. Say like the Red Wings were playing a 7:05 game in Detroit. So I'd get there about 6 o'clock ish, make sure all the satellites were up, make sure I had all my recording, my recording software all ready to go. Make sure I had some water in me. Because the studio was always blazing hot no matter what time of year it was, with all the equipment. Make sure all my volumes were good. We'd have a radio in the break room, an actual radio in the break room. Make
Right.
sure I have everything that sounded okay on that end, on the very tail end, so that way it doesn't, you're not catching an echo, you're not catching my mic, on or whatever. Just making sure that the broadcast feed was good to go. I made sure that all of our logs were ready to go to make sure we're playing the right commercials. Last thing I want to do is play a Tequila Willie's commercial. This is how I'm dating myself, but there used to be a bar called Tequila Willie's in town. I'm making sure that we don't have, making sure we have all of our like our beat ups commercials, making sure we have all of our local commercials playing. Um, Making sure that Bill catches a 10-second, liner, making sure our musics are clean coming in and out of breaks, just things like that. And it was, for the most part, it was an automated process, just because the digital engineers did all that type of stuff. And we just, as a board engineer, I just made sure everything, made sure all the lights stayed on and everything rolled. So that was the easy part of my job. But, the long nights, when you have, the nights I remember the most were times where I'd come in and I have to do a Pistons and or a Wings and Pistons game back to back. So a lot of the times it was, the Wings were a 6:35 start, and the Pistons would be like a 10:35 start, or a late night start out in the West Coast.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, because I think the Red Wings were still in the Western Division at that time when I was
Yeah.
doing meetings. So that a lot of long nights, a lot of long nights of nodding off the board. It's like 1:30 in the morning, and you're still trying to focus on the game, and it's a snooze fest 1-1 tie, and you're like, oh, someone scored, and you gotta like make sure you clock the where the highlight comes in, and then then at the end of the night, after everything's all shut down, you bumped it back to your local programming, which was usually, I think we were running ESPN radio at the time, because we had just switched over from being an affiliate of Fox Sports to ESPN, and so then that's when the real work happened. That's when I would be cutting highlights, putting together all the different packages for Bill in the morning. He would do, highlights coming in and out of breaks, and then he'd want to talk about the highlights and, talk about the game. Obviously, the guys that worked in the studio, actual hosts would actually watch the games, or, if not, they'd get highlights on, with their morning coffee, or, on the way into work. So it was a very interesting experience to peel back that layer of sports journalism, and it's not always the Ken Cal and Paul Woods. You're not always in the booth, and you have to do some of the groundwork, and that's kind of where I came in and what I was doing for 3.5 years of life.
Yeah. You know what? I want to piggyback on something when I asked you the first question. When you were talking about Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, them kind of being your inspirations because you weren't big enough to be a pro wrestler. I totally agree with you because I'm 5'5", 150 pounds, and I'm not getting in the wrestling ring. You're not dropping me on my head. You're not about to throw me across out of the ring onto the floor. You're not about to do that. So this was like I knew I always wanted to have some involvement in wrestling, and then when I started getting interested in podcasting a few years back, and I started this 2 years ago. Yeah, I'm like, this is perfect right here because I'm not getting no ring for real. I'm,
So
I'm
it's
I,
it's funny that you mentioned that. So I have had the chance to get in a professional wrestling ring and learn how to take a bump. Um, there, it's a very interesting sensation when you take a bump. So the first thing they do is they teach you how to take a bump. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to grab the middle rope, and then you're supposed to like do like almost like a wall sit, and then
Mhm.
you like lean back and you land. There's like a whole technique to it.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
the first time I did it, I had the wind knocked out of me. That's, I had to, gingerly get up, and they, the people that were trying to show me how to do it, they're not professionals by any chance, but, they were, some amateur backyard guys, like some, I think one of them actually wrestled for JCW once upon a time ago. And, he was like, no, 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 you can't, don't throw yourself back. You have to like exaggerate certain movements. And that's kind of where my brain went, was the athleticism part of it. And that's kind of what I think that was in 2012. 2012. So between like 2008 and 9, I'd kind of stopped watching wrestling for a while. Just life events and things, and working in sports radio and being less involved with wrestling. Being more, as a young adult, trying to find my place in the world. Wrestling kind of became an afterthought. I didn't have a chance to watch it, but then I got to have a little bit more freedom with my career, what I was doing at the time. And one summer I just went to this guy's house, and he had a ring, and he's like, "Yeah, you want to do a bump?" And I'm like, like, do I want you to throw me? No, probably not. But like, no, no, no. He's like, it's not, wrestling isn't all just throws and punches, and so he kind of peeled back that layer. And I think had that phrase before, is that I like to be able to peel back the layers of things, and find out the why. And I'm a very curious person by nature, so um just peeling back that why. And to your point that you mentioned about getting in the ring and getting thrown around, I was actually in attendance. Um, it was SmackDown 2002, 2003, the Halloween episode. Um, and you asked me what some memorable moments are. Um, I think you asked me about my radio career. Like I said, I don't have really many memorable moments with that. I have more memorable moments with wrestling and being in attendance for a lot of fun things. And the first real big memory I had, I've been going, I haven't missed a Monday Night Raw or SmackDown. I think I've only missed like 3 out of the 28 that have been TV tapings here in Grand Rapids.
mhm.
But the one I remember the most, and this will forever cement my fandom, and we talk about being small wrestlers. Well, to your fear, I remember a match. I think it was Brock Lesnar, or excuse me, it was Big Show versus Rey Mysterio on SmackDown. And this was him and Brock Lesnar were getting ready to fight at Survivor Series.
Mhm.
And I remember distinctly being like four four or five chairs behind it, or 4 or 5 chairs next to it. Can't remember how close it was. I was close enough. Where Big Show literally had Rey Mysterio up in the ring, inside the ring, and threw him like 6 rows into the stands. I
Ooh.
was there that night. I was literally right there. So to your point about being thrown around, yeah, Ray had some cojones for that one, man. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they already go through a lot with the training and stuff, and just landing, just falling on that mat, take a toll on your body. Nah, and you got to be able. When you hear the wrestlers talk, they always say that you always got to be able to trust the person that you're working with. Even if I trust you, you not dropping me on my head. I'm sorry, you not dropping me on my head. Hey, I just stick to podcasting. If I ever get involved in a wrestling match or whatever, let me just, if it's a title match, let me just hand them the belt and just raise their hand or something. I do that, but nah, I'm not trying to be no special tag partner. None of that. Nope, I'm good.
So if Jelly Roll gets hurt, or Randy Orton comes to you and says, Mike D, we need you. I need you, big dog. I need you. You're gonna be like, no, no
Nah,
way.
I'm good. I'm good. Nah, now the one thing that I do want to do, and I would love to do this, if I had the opportunity to come to the ring with Jay Uso coming through the crowd doing the whole yeet thing, that would be right there, the icing on the cake for me. Now that I would get involved in.
And I will say that when he was here, I want to say it was, how many weeks ago was it? It
Yeah,
was when
because they
John
were in
Cena.
Grand Rapids a couple weeks
Yep.
ago.
So when John Cena dropped his pipe bomb, I was there for that. And let me tell you, the vibe when he stood up on the turnbuckle, it was weird. You like the like I said, I've only missed a handful of them since they started coming to the Van Andel Arena, which is our local. They call it the freezer on Fulton, because it's on Fulton Street, and it's Grand Rapids. Griffin's hockey has been pretty good in the last couple of years. So, um, that it's weird. It's surreal when you're in like, a viral moment like that, and you don't,
Yeah.
you feel that like it's like not like the tensions in the air, but you feel like you get this like, oh my God, this is something. And you don't know like how big it's gonna be, but
Yeah.
you're like, this is something. And when he's, talking about, Matt Cardona and all this stuff, and I'm just like,
He went in on that pipe bomb.
and I'm just like, I'm sitting there, and first of all, I'm half in the bag. By the way, that was a day drinking thing for me. So, I was already half in the bag. I sobered up quite a bit towards the end, so I had to walk home. But um, I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, like looking at the guy next to me, and the guy next to me is just like, and I'm looking at, so the Van Andel, for reference, the Van Andel is probably one of the smaller arenas that they go to. So there's not a bad seat in the house. But you can, from where I was sitting, I could see a lot of faces. So the way it's shaped is like a U shape. It's not a full
Mhm.
like full stadium, but I always say it's kind of built for Monday Night Raw. It's a small enough venue where you can have a good seat, but like I can see everybody's faces, and they're just like,
Wow.
and it was just, I'd never been a part of anything like that. I've been through some moments, like Seth Rollins winning the United States Championship from Dolph Ziggler. I was there for that. Like I said, I was there for The Rock versus Eddie Guerrero, which was an awesome match too. I was there for I saw a lot of good matches, a lot of good SmackDowns and Raws in recent memory, but to just be a part of that surreal moment, first of all, I'm a sports fan first and foremost. So being a part of like something in an arena, like actually there, it's a lot different than watching it on TV. And then especially when, it was what I think that Cena pipe on was like the most watched like YouTube clip like ever in the history of WWE.
Yeah.
That just blows my mind that I was there for that. I was actually there for that.
That's what's up. I did because when I'm closer to Detroit, and like I remember when they would come here for the Joe Louis Arena, and the one show that I could remember going to was the one when Shane McMahon came back after he was gone for like 7 years, and I think
Wow,
Stephanie,
that was I think that was yep, that was right.
yeah, and the Stephanie and Vince was getting some type of McMahon Appreciation Award, something they was giving themselves. And then as they were talking, that's when Shane's music played. And when I tell you, the crowd went nuts because that was his first time being back in 7 years. So when he came back, it was just like the crowd went crazy. And then when before he went backstage, he had grabbed the mic and was just telling, the fans just thank you for the applause. Really meant a lot to him and stuff like that. So that's definitely, I remember that. And I can remember going to Hell in a Cell, the first pay-per-view they had at Little Caesars Arena. That was the one when,
Oh wow.
when Shane came from the top when he was going up against Kevin Owens, and so
Yep.
that's when I
I
think
remember
that's
that.
when Sammy turned heel for the first time.
Yep. Yep. I remember that. That was an epic pay-per-view. So
Yeah,
if my I'm gonna channel my inner Mike Tenay because he's a wrestling historian that doesn't not get enough credit for anything. Mike Tenay, I loved his run in TNA. I still watch a little bit of TNA here and there, every once in a great while because I'm a big fan of Matt Cardona myself, just because of his whole like persona change. He's a whole different person now. So if I'm remembering correctly, um, Vince was giving like a Legacy of Excellence award. I think that's what it was
I
to
think so.
Stephanie.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's what it was. It was like ooh, 2016,
I think so.
February,
Yeah,
February of 2016.
yeah,
I think that's what it was. And then the look on Stephanie's face. That's what I remember the most. Is I don't know, she's reading out of something or she's got a planned speech or whatever,
yeah,
and she just here comes the money and just
yeah.
like a typical McMahon face. Just
And I think,
I remember that too. Now that we're talking about that, yeah, that ticks in the eidetic memory of mine. So
And I had some good seats too. We had some floor seats. That's when the floor seats was like 125.
Oh,
You
they're
hey,
insane.
yeah, the floor seats now. I looked at the prices for Raw when they come here in 2 weeks, and it's ridiculous, man. It's triple of what floor seats were. I would even say probably like 5, 7 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And I have a theory about that too. Obviously we talk about sports and entertainment, and I really think that COVID really made this massive crater in how we accept entertainment now. You know, I think a lot of it is that we, they didn't have venues. There's nothing to put on. Obviously WWE went to the Thunderdome and did their own thing, but you know, WWE is kind of capitalizing on what's going on in the real world, and that's
Yeah,
ticket prices are skyrocketing because they're all trying to recoup the money that they lost for a year and a half for no sports. And rightfully so. I get it. I understand. The economy is in this just massive shift of like, people are willing to pay premium for sports because they're willing to get away from their regular lives. And but I've tried to go. So this is kind of a microcosm of that. I've been trying to go to WrestleMania since 2018. Every single time I've had either a life event happen or it's been way too unaffordable. And so I know even trying to go to Tampa the first time, so 2020, I finally had everything booked. I had everything but the event ticket, right? So I was like, okay, I'll go on StubHub and last minute, because this is when you can still do that. That's when StubHub was still cheap and whatever, but had the hotel, had the flight, had everything booked, and then boom, COVID happened like 2 weeks before, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like this is a 3 year journey that I've been trying to do for three different times, and life has gotten in the way. And then, then I tried to do it in 2021. I'm like, life got in the way then. I had the chance to afford it, but like I just had too much life stuff going on. And then same thing happened the year after that. Then finally, I was able to afford it thought I was able to afford it to go to Vegas this last year. No,
hey,
no.
I heard Vegas like it's pretty much an arm and you have to sell an arm and a leg to try to go to WrestleMania in Vegas, and they about
Yeah,
to do it again next year.
yeah.
Yeah,
I hope my 401k is ready to make a withdrawal to go get tickets for that. So, I had the chance to go this year, and or to go this year to WrestleMania 40 and or the 41, and I looked at the card and I was like, the WrestleMania 40 card was a lot better. And I
yeah,
I get things in life happens, and you want to make this big, big John Cena heel turn that I didn't think anybody else in the world was expecting either. So, that was the most shocking thing I've ever seen is, John Cena's heel turn. I think the only one that shocks me more is Austin's heel turn at WrestleMania 17. And, but those are those magic moments that make wrestling. And, like you said, it's hard to justify spending, essentially like a month's paycheck just for the ticket to go, not to mention everything else.
yeah, definitely. So one last question about the radio experience. As someone with experience in live production, what do you think wrestling podcasts and shows can learn from radio?
How to pivot, how to work on a dime. You're, you know, somebody that I respect that in your community that I like a lot in radio is Mike Valenti. Mike Valenti, he has this like presence about him, that um he just has that presence about him, and he commands the room. And that's the one thing that I learned in podcasting is that not that you have to be not that you have to be a presence, but like your show has to have an identity, right? The things where I think about like major podcasters like Conrad. Obviously Conrad has a connection with Ric Flair and Jim Cornette and all those guys and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But he didn't. Some of these podcasters don't really have those connections. So making connections, making networking. I know you have Wrestling Society Network. Make connections through them. I think the whole reason how I got here was I'm a big fan of Mania Club. I've been on Mania Club since, geez, I'd have to look at my history of Mania Club, but I've been in Mania Club for a number of years. And so I've noticed that every time that they've come to Michigan, there's always posts about stuff when they come to Detroit, Grand Rapids, like tons of them. And maybe it's, maybe it's just the red card theory, but every time they start to gear up to come here, I hear nothing but, every time I see a post, it's something about Grand Rapids, something about Detroit, something about, Holland, something about this, something about that. And I'm like, I want to kind of pick the brain of whoever runs Mania Club, because you could branch that out into different, regions. You could branch that out and do all these different things. You could have, a live, broadcast with wrestling from the through and three. You could have something like me doing a podcast on the west side, and then you could have like a super show every week, where however it works. You can network those things, and getting to be a pivot point. You always got to adapt. You always have to adapt, and that's what we were always taught with radio, is that, you know all right, maybe are we not reaching the right people? Well, let's switch up the marketing a little bit. Are we not getting enough listeners? Well, maybe let's make the content a little bit more edgy. Maybe have something crazy happen on it. And it's just all about, at the time in radio, it was about ratings and money. If you weren't making money doing it, or if you weren't getting ratings from it, then what are you doing it for? Obviously, it's a business, and podcasting, it can be a business. It can be for fun too. But usually it starts out as being fun, and then you figure out how to monetize it, how to scale it. And I guess that's the two correlations I can have between radio and wrestling podcasts, is that you got to scale it at some point if you want it to grow and continue and be successful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And yeah, that's where I'm trying to get with mine. You know what I'm saying? Just trying to get it to the point where, just growing, just trying to make different connections, trying to have different guests. And you never know where podcasting could take you. You know what I'm saying? And it's cool to just talk about something that you like. You know what I'm saying? If you're doing a podcast and it's not something that you like, you're not going to enjoy yourself. But if you sitting here talking about like how we talking about wrestling and other podcasters do, it could be a fun experience for you.
Yeah, and I've got to review some of the guests you've had on and stuff, and it seems like you have a lot of passionate fans, and you do have a good subscriber summary. So it's just about how you want to market yourself, I guess. And that's my only advice, is just where you want to go with it. And with podcasting, it's not like there isn't an audience you can't reach, because everybody has a cell phone, everybody has digital media, everybody has all those things now. And it doesn't have to be just localized. Obviously yours is localized because it's wrestling from the three and three, and Detroit does have a lot more. Um, they're obviously the bigger town than Grand Rapids, so they have a lot more things that come through there. Like GCW comes through there all the time. I remember for a long time, uh, Border City Wrestling was a big thing, and that was across in Windsor. In Toronto, and that's where you get guys like Edge and Rhino and Christian Cage and um, I think Alex Shelley and Kip Sabian, or not, Chris Sabin started over there, and
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a couple of the guys I'm thinking of. Zach Gowen comes to mind. They're
Yeah,
talking about throwback names. Zach Gowen, yeah, that dude. I got to watch him a couple times in the Indies in Detroit, but you don't. It's hard because we don't have that independent promotions here, so it's hard to get kind of grassroots information like that. But go to those shows, go to those things. I mean, hey, I have a podcast with Wrestle Society. Maybe they can come on there and hype it up for you. Hype up, come when Game Changer Wrestling is coming in. I think September or August. I think they're doing the Majestic, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
sweet.
instead of Harpo's, and I like watching Game Changer Wrestling. It's different. It's a little bit more edgy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but you know, obviously you get the Nick Gage appearances, and it's like he's gonna hit somebody with a light bulb that evening. So,
Yeah,
um,
and then he be hitting people, slicing people with pizza cutters and stuff. Like,
yeah,
man, like,
yep,
oh man,
yep. I've kind of been slowly like grassrooting, trying to get them to come to Grand Rapids to do a show. I'd like to do that, have them do a show at the intersection or DeVos Hall. That'd be impressive, but we don't have any of those like mid-sized venues. I mean, there's a venue called the Intersection. It's probably um one of our smaller venues. It seats about, I think I want to say about 2,000, 3,000 people, but it's just this big wide warehouse kind of opening in the stage. But I've seen them do the stage kind of setups for the smaller shows, which are cool. But you want, if as a wrestling fan, you want that 360 view. I want to be able to see. I don't have to sit on one one turnbuckle and try to do a spot in one corner the whole time. So that just gets, then you get, you hijack your own match. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience when you go to those smaller indie shows.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So let's talk a little bit about wrestling and stuff. I know you said we talked about the radio experience and everything, but how did your love for pro wrestling begin? I know you talked about Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, but like, who were some of your favorite superstars?
So my dad was a kind of a wrestling fan. He had watched it just because it was kind of cool when he was about, I want to say when he was in his like late 20s, early 30s when I was starting to kind of get into it. So we're talking right. I want to say it was right at the start of the NWO. I think I was a little young for that still. I think I was like 4 or 5. But I got to be a little bit older. And obviously when you're 7 and 8, that must have been 97, 98. Then you start to see the tide change with the Monday Night Wars. I was mostly a WCW guy for the most part, just because my dad had cable, and so not a lot of people, not a lot of kids I knew had cable. Just growing up in kind of a I don't want to say poverty isn't the right word, but just less fortunate friends that I had that didn't have
Gotcha.
cable. So I was the one that had cable all the time, and I remember distinctly watching the pay-per-view with what was it? Was it Hogan and Goldberg at Halloween Havoc? I can't
Yeah,
remember. I think it was. I think it was either Goldberg and DDP and Goldberg or
I
Hogan.
think it was Goldberg and DDP,
Yep,
if I'm
and then
correct.
they accidentally cut that off, right? Well, my
Yeah,
dad actually, that's the first real big memory I had watching it. It was we're watching first time he had ever ordered pay per view, right? And pay per view was like, I think like $40 or $50 at the time. You had to like go through the box or call the
yeah,
give me your credit card number, or tack it on your bill. And I
yeah,
remember him and I just got snacks and Chinese, just all this like food, just sat in the living room and watched it. And you know, the finish is starting to come on, and then boop, done. And I'm like,
yeah. I
what
heard about that.
what what, what is that what's supposed to happen? Because like this, so mind you, this is the first time I've ever really watched a pay-per-view.
Hmm.
And I must have been like 8 or 9. And I'm like, I know how Monday Night Raw ends. Usually ends when you see the little Monday Night Raw like copyright 2006 or whatever, copyright blah blah blah,
Yeah,
all rights reserved, Titan Sports or Titan Entertainment, and or you had like the little thing that says, at the end sometimes of Turner Productions, they'd be like WCW. You'd have like the obviously it was clearly an ad, right? But just to go blank, and then you're just like, I looked at him and I go, so then at first I go, did Sting come down there? And then I thought, did someone trip over a cable? And then I just like all these things. Obviously, I have no idea what kayfabe is at this point. I'm like thinking all of it's real, right? Because you're 8 years old, and
yeah,
you don't know if your belief is suspended. I think is what Jim Cornette likes to say. And you just the first thing I thought was Sting. And then the second thing I thought was, did someone trip over a cord or something and they just lost the feed? And then we're waiting there, and then it's it goes back to the you know screen of death or whatever, with the scrambled screen, and we're like, so it's starting over? Like, are we getting it for free? Like,
yeah,
so, and I remember my dad going, yeah, I don't know what happened. Like, and then, obviously you get older and you hear about what happens, but then you get just old enough before that point, and you're like, you know, obviously I'm 8, so I'm like, my mind's kind of racing. I'm like, wait a minute, did someone get hurt and they just like didn't want to show it? Like,
yeah,
you think all these things, and then Owen Hart happens, and that
yeah.
that wasn't very far after that. And after that I started watching them, a little bit more. I would get the big ones that I would want to watch, like I'd get Survivor Series, then I started getting WrestleManias, and then that's when Blast Zones came out. Do you remember those Blast Zones?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you go to like your local B Dubs. There was only one in town that did it, and that's when I started going and doing those. And so, um, I got to stay up late on Sundays in the school year and all that stuff. So that's kind of where my love for wrestling really was started was, it was so unpredictable. And, and then you had great commentators like, you know, uh, Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay and, you know, you know, Bischoff for all of his glory was actually not a bad commentator. And, then you start getting the era of, so like I said, that was 96. And then 97, you have McFoley flying off the cell, and then it's by God, he killed him. So you have those iconic moments where it's like, oh God, like you have the Jim Ross moments, and then you start to get into late night television, right? And I think you know where I'm going with this. Then you get to Joey Styles, oh my God.
Yeah.
So that so
ECW.
and so all these iconic voices just like you know painted the picture for everything, and that's where really I started loving it from an entertainment perspective. And then as you get older and you start to realize that it's not fake. I hate the word fake. I hate when people call it fake or scripted. It's sports entertainment. That's really what it
Yeah.
is. It's sports professional wrestling. It's its own cool term. And when you start to like what I said again, peeling back that layer. When I finally start to peel back that layer of it, I started to appreciate it more as an art form. And then you see, I think shortly after that was Sid Vicious breaking his leg,
Oh
and you
yeah.
and
Ah,
I think that's when I finally started to understand that, dude, this is real. And then
yeah.
Owen Hart happened, and then you go, okay, something here doesn't add up that this is like a real thing, because you see like people even in timekeepers and staff just like generally like panic and fear, and you're like, okay, so is this some of it scripted and then it's not, and then like I said, then you start to learn more and more about it. And like I said, I started appreciating it more as an art form. And now in this day and age, it's like every guy and girl for that matter, everybody out there is just super athletic and owns their craft. And you can see some of them that are like they're okay, but you see more and more of them like pay respect to the business more and more, like pay tribute to who came before them, and they start respecting the game a little bit more. And I think that's the next evolution, is you're going to see more superstars be more throwbacks to the original, the OGs. And I think in this Triple H regime of WWE now, is I think that's what he's doing. That's why he brought Cena back. That's why Goldberg is going to have his last match. That's why you have these I don't want to say nostalgia acts, but some of these guys can still go because they learn how to protect themselves a lot better. And you learn how to do it better. And there's modern advances in medicine, and you don't have to be Chris Benoit. Sorry for dropping that name, but just
Oh, it's cool.
every time I've seen him in person at every single event that I've been to, dude just went in hard. And
Yeah.
you can't do that anymore. You get injured. And that kind of brings me into a great segue is let's talk about the Seth Rollins thing. That's a guy who he's been injured a couple times now. Now, has he taken some time off here and there? Absolutely. And that's kind of the one of my favorite things about Seth Rollins is that he's transcended this into an art form alongside Roman Reigns. Now, obviously, we know Roman. He's got the connections with being it's his family business. We know that. He's always going to be good. I was never one of those guys that was like, oh, stop feeding me Roman Reigns as a baby face. Like, I didn't care about that. I just wanted to see him evolve and get better. And it's the product now is absorbed so much differently than just 2 hours a week on TV. Now it's endless, and that's now it's like I said, now it's an art form. Now it's an art form with multiple mediums, and that's kind of what my love for wrestling is now. Is just it's different mediums that you can have it with now.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, you that the whole time the Monday Night Wars, that was a great time, especially like you said, you were a big WCW fan. I was too, but I was also one of them kids that was always like, I would watch WCW from 7 to 9. And then when Raw would come on, I would watch the beginning of Raw, depending on what match was on WCW. Because when Raw was getting ready to come on, WCW will always have like a big match, or they would have the NWO come out to kind of like compete with WWF.
Yep.
So I was always doing that, and then I think after maybe like 9:30, 10 o'clock, that's when I make my decision on which show I was gonna watch the rest of the night, and that'd be WCW. But yeah, WCW, I would say from like 96 when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash first arrived, and they declared that they were going to war before Hogan even turned heel. That's when you started seeing like that's when WCW was interesting. Then you had the cruiserweight division that was in there. And it's funny that you mentioned Mike Tenay. Mike Tenay knew every cruiserweight move. He knew everything about the cruiserweight. He knew their whole bio, where they was born, where they wrestled, everything. But I like that he did that because he brought something different to commentating and stuff like that. And like besides the NWO, Sting was my favorite. And just the whole character transition that he did from going from being the surfer dude to just this vigilante, you know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I had told somebody like the Sting Hogan story kind of reminded me of Batman and the Joker at a kind of a little bit, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even though he was the Crow, he still had that Batman effect when he would come down from the Raptors and stuff like that.
Yep.
But yeah, that was like my favorite time. And then just seeing guys like Diamond Dallas Page put in the work, Booker T, the Scott Steiner going from a tag team wrestler to a main eventer. You know what I'm saying? We saw Jeff Jarrett, who was in WWF, leave there and become a star in WCW. We saw Goldberg. Right. But just
I sit and kind of look at that kind of era and like how much talent was there, and then it was all guaranteed. So I don't think I think we have a lot of what ifs WCW, and a lot of people will say a lot of the business side and what could have happened. Where I'm thinking is if you didn't guarantee all these guys contracts, how good they could have been. Yeah. So they actually worked hand to mouth, put in some of the work like Rey Mysterio's or Conan's or or Eddie Guerrero's or Jericho's or Perry Saturn's or Dean Malenko's, all those guys that are my favorites. I was always a fan of the big guys, but those like the Raven and the Raven's Flock story, and then the Filthy Animals always coming out, and I was always interested in like the non-main event stuff, and later, that's always what I wonder about is what could have been of the guys that were good if they worked like they should have,
Yeah. But you know what? I will say this about WCW. You kind of, if you really, really think about it, WCW really started falling off when they let the Radicals go, Jericho, and the Big Show. Because those six right there, that was really your future of WCW. You had the Giant, who was the future big man, the big man of the future. You had Jericho.
Hold on to that thought real quick. If you ever saw Big Show do a drop kick, you'll be floored.
Yeah.
That guy had
and he used to do the little kip up, the little thing that Shawn Michaels used to do. He used to do that too. You had Jericho, who could have been a future world champion in WCW. And that's not including Booker T. You still had Goldberg. You had the cruiserweight division that was still hot. You know what I'm saying? They had guys that they could have built around, but they put too much. They gave guys like Hogan, Nash, Savage. They gave those guys too much power and too much authority. And I think that's what hurt WCW in the long run. And it'd be crazy to see if they were around and never went out of business.
Yeah, and we do a lot of what ifs, and you know, I think that you know, we talk about pivoting, right? So when Vince bought WCW and all the library and all that stuff, um, obviously he didn't bring over everybody's contract, because
Yeah,
he had guys that got paid to sit at home, right? And
yeah,
if I'm getting paid, I don't want to be on WWE. I don't want Vince to, make me wrestle. I don't like, especially if you had guys like Hogan, Nash, and Hall that were all still pissed off at Vince for
yeah,
whatever reason or another, and Vince is one of those guys from my perspective. I'll tell you my personal story about him in a later minute, but he seemed to always have a grudge. Maybe not like a like I'm not like a vindictive grudge, but like have one chef that I used to work under, he kind of had this phrase like, well, eventually the birdie's got to leave the nest sometime, and it's kind of like, oh, so you're back, huh?
yeah.
I got something for you. Uh-huh. I think the few people he didn't do that to, I think he did it to Booker T originally. When Booker T came over, he absolutely did it to Buff Bagwell. That was like that first night was get the fuck out
Yeah,
of here. Like
yeah,
when you literally have your two hottest stars in Austin and Angle throwing you out of the building, literally, and then to never be seen again on WWE television, like you had to have done something really bad. And
yeah,
obviously, I think in his Dark Side of the Ring thing, I think Buff did talk about it. I can't remember. It's been a while since I saw that episode, but I know he talked about it. And um, you know, it, this is an era where you have guys that were on stuff. You have guys that were partying all the time, and we talk about being on the road all the time and wrestling. 300 days a year. It's not like that anymore.
yeah,
I think the quality of life is better for a wrestler now, and that's why you're seeing John Cena can still. I mean, he can still do it ish. I think like you said, having the right partner, having the right person. You still have guys that can go. Cody Rhodes has been doing it since he was how old? And then Randy Orton's in his 40s still doing it. Now
yeah,
that he's like 50 pounds heavier, but it's all about taking care of yourself. And I
yeah.
think that's when Triple H started having a voice to the people in the wellness policy. And it took obviously it took Eddie and Benoit's deaths to kind of like reevaluate what do we look for in talent when we're looking for them developing. And obviously you pull some of the major guys from the indies, you pull some major guys from other promotions, and that's always going to be done. But if I'm Triple H, if I'm Matt Bloom, if I'm any of these guys, any of these trainers, anybody in power, that's my first question is, what do you do outside of WWE? How do you protect yourself? How do you live your life? Now you could you could go out and be like, Rob Van Dam and being like super into cannabis and, living this holistic lifestyle and like training your body. That's another guy who could still go, by the way. He's been doing it just as long. And so you have these guys that just take care of your bodies better. And, you know, um, however you heal is however you heal, right? Obviously you're not going to have the guys that were like, JBL crushing, almost a half a keg of beer a night, right? And you're not gonna have that anymore. The
Yeah,
training is so different, and the product is so different. These guys actually take care of themselves because they want to do it for a long time. You want to get to that, next contract, and it is what it is. And obviously, some of the bigger stars are making a lot more money, granted, but some of the smaller guys they're not making so much money, but there's TV time is what it's all about for them, or everybody has a different motive of why they're in pro wrestling, right? Some just naturally got it. Kurt Angle naturally got it. Some guys worked really, really hard at it, like Jericho or like uh, I'm trying to think of like Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins just worked really hard at it. You have all these different backgrounds, and not everybody's privileged to be, Roman Reigns or The Rock, to be have generational talent, like that.
definitely, definitely. So let's go back to the Seth Rollins injury. It's been a lot of people out here talking about, oh, this is a work, and oh, this is part of the story, and he's gonna come back when CM Punk wins the title or is in the championship match or anything. Um, I think it's legit just from for what I'm reading. I don't see no reason. I mean, they could, but just from what I'm seeing and reading, it's legit. And I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts? What do you think about the injury?
So going back to kind of my sports background, I know what a knee injury looks like. I've seen a billion of them. I've seen them in person. I've seen them, on the field when I've been on the field. I've seen them on the mat when I wrestled in high school. I know when someone gets hurt. I know what it looks like. I also know how tough Seth Rollins is. I know that he's one of those guys that he's gonna put his heart and soul on it. And sometimes, you know, um, I'll go back to two different points. I'll go back to when CM Punk first came back, right? So after War Games, Seth Rollins just was like he he wears his emotion on his face. He's never not gonna have a mask on. He's never gonna have a mask on about that. You're gonna see what his reaction is all the time.
Yeah,
And when he landed and he jumped back up straight away,
yeah.
and like that's not a natural wrestling movement. That
No,
and I hate to get clinical and like my God, what's his name? Mike Peralta voice here, right? I hate to do this, but you look at Seth and you look at when he did that first flip and he
yeah,
landed kind of on his knee and he kind of like moved, like he adjusted knee pads. And those are little things that you don't think the fans notice sometimes, but like really eagle eye fans will notice like little hand touches or, when the big one for me is when your hand is out on the mat and you're like, you just have a big spot. The referee will take your hand and you squeeze it. It's a dead nonverbal giveaway of hey, I'm okay. And
yeah,
so for him to land on his knee and adjust his knee pad as he was getting up to do that other flip, and then he lands, he's supposed to land on his feet, right? That wasn't going to be the spot for the BFT unless that was towards the end, unless that was going to be the spot for the BFT, and then in that case, it's a whole different story. But landing on his knee and then jumping back and just him like scrunching his face, and you could barely see it because his hair was in his way. But like knowing what Seth Rollins looks like when he's under the lights, and knowing what Seth Rollins is in general pain,
yeah,
you know, that's not real. That's real. That's not. You can't fake that. And if it was a work, he would have. He wouldn't have gotten dragged in the corner. He would have landed on his back, and he would have had LA Knight pick him up, do something with him, and end it. So for him to like kind of roll over to Heyman, and Heyman like, and I've met Paul Heyman in person. He's come into the hotel I worked at for a couple of years. And
okay,
ordered food. He's a nice guy. Um, for him to have this like wide eyed of concern and not like he was trying not to talk without like he was trying to be short,
yeah,
and he was looking at the ref, was looking at the doctor, looking at Seth, and if if that was still a work, he would have been just talking to Seth to be like, "Hey, Seth, let's just make this look, let's make this look legit, and then do the BFT and make the end." But then
mm,
you have the doctor come down and look at him, and for as close as LA Knight got to him, when LA Knight was kind of trying to approach him, and then the referee kind of took a minute to back him off. Normally, the referee's like, "Okay, no, I know that this is the work, I know this is the part of it."
yeah,
For Justin Carr to go like to leave that little space between them, that also tells me it's not a work.
yeah,
Um, so I'll go back to my second point. If they were gonna long term storyline this, they would have never given him the briefcase.
mm,
That would never have been. That's not the case. You don't. I'll go back to if you remember when Mr. Kennedy got hurt and he had to give the briefcase to Edge. I don't know if that
yeah,
was yeah. It's so now we're kind of blurring that line too of like okay, that wasn't a work either. That was a legit storyline. He got hurt, but you can't undo it. So I think now what Triple H is doing is going, okay, we need to pump the brakes on all this and let's figure it out. I think that's why he brought Roman Reigns back because your top heel is gone,
yeah,
and you need a big moneymaker that's not just Cena versus Rhodes too, and obviously it's now it's going to be him and Jay versus Braun and Solo or Braun and Bronson. So
yeah,
that's going to be a done deal. I don't know. You know, history of knee injuries tell us what 9 to 12 months. You know, you come back and come back like Triple H and come back in 9 months. You could be like Charlotte Flair, almost wait a year and a half, have a setback. And I think as early as today, or as late as today, I think Seth Rollins was on the Rich Eisen show this morning or this afternoon. I think he did say something about it. He doesn't know. Um,
Mm.
the quote I read was that thank God they were in Birmingham. Not I'm not speaking for stuff, but like thank God they were in Birmingham, Alabama. That's
Yeah,
where Dr. James Andrews is. He's the foremost orthopedic surgeon in the world,
yeah.
and I'm sure they took X-rays. I'm sure they took MRIs. But Seth said something like the swelling was too big. After 2 days, it's not going to go down. My cousin's torn his ACL like 3 times. That thing is like this big. That thing is
Ooh.
this massive. I mean, you're talking about you're talking about the outside part of your knee. Now, if you stretch your knee out as like taut as you can, and you'll see that muscle that's like that, just ever so slightly, like tense your leg up as straight as you can, and then just simply like find that spot that's kind of tight and push on it.
Mhm.
That hurts. That even hurts just doing that. Now, tearing that and that being completely off your knee,
Ah,
yeah, the swelling is going to be, your knee is going to be the size, like 3 sizes too big. And so I'm pretty sure he probably had to cut his tights off because
yeah.
that's how swelled up you get that quick. And if you look at MMA fighters, like when they get swollen up, just getting tagged from leg kicks, it's the
Yeah.
same concept. You're increasing blood flow to that mass, and when you have that tear, you know that to me seems like it seems like an ACL or an MCL, meniscus, one or the other. It just depends on how bad it is, and it depends on if they can get the swelling down. Probably, I would say by Friday. If they can't get the swelling down by Friday, then they're gonna have to wait a couple weeks until the swelling goes down, and then it's a crapshoot at that point. The sooner the swelling goes down, those types of injuries, the sooner you kind of figure out what's gonna be next the next steps. And
Yeah.
I would concur, it's gonna be a couple months. Now, my dad said something the other day. My dad said something actually on Sunday morning about that. He has a 1 calendar year to be able to cash it in. Now, this is where WWE can get real creative. They can get real screwy with this. I don't know if the point of the topic was to eventually strap a rocket to Braun, like Randy Orton in evolution status, but I think you're onto something. It is it long term? Is it short term? I don't know. I don't think that WWE had the idea. I think Triple H still wanted to get some feedback and see what happens. And I think we're in this weird meta age of WWE where it's maybe they are peeling back the layers a little bit. And again, peeling back the layer. Um, you know, Randy Orton going on. He's going to be on Jimmy Kimmel tonight with Jelly Roll guest hosting. Like you have those little things nowadays, and
Yeah.
I think WWE is going to have a show on Netflix that's going to completely blow everything up and just destroy kayfabe. I think, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe this is them kind of bracing the world for that. I guess.
Yeah. It's gonna be, and I know you just brought that show up that they got coming up on Netflix. I'm interested in that because it's gonna be showing everything behind the scenes. It's gonna be showing them talking about who they want to push, who they want to book for this match, who's they. I think it's a little too much. I think I'm definitely gonna watch. I just want to, see, just kind of see some of the things that they talk about. But I think it's a little too much. I think they giving away too much to the people. You know what I'm saying? You still got to keep a little mystery and everything. But to go back to Seth Rollins, it's gonna be interesting with this knee injury because I think I've been hearing that like you said, the knee is still swollen, and this is the same knee that he's torn or injured a couple of times. So, I know most ACL, MCL injuries take anywhere from like 6 to 10 months or something like that. It's gonna be interesting to see if it's longer, and if it's longer, what do they do with the Money in the Bank briefcase? So, what do you think if he's out past that year that he's supposed to cash it in? What do you think they should do with the briefcase?
You know, I've seen wild theories out there like suspend it in the air at money or suspend it in the air at the next pay-per-view, whatever, redo it, redo Money in the Bank, whatever. I actually have a very interesting idea, and I'd like to think outside the box a lot of times. I think that depending on the severity, if if he's I think you wait, give it a couple weeks. I think you get through SummerSlam. Let's get through SummerSlam. Let's get to August. Let's whatever emotion already that we anything that we have to pivot. Let's get through that, and then maybe we can revisit it. Maybe let stuff kind of quietly fade out for a minute. Let's concentrate on other things, and then you can kind of rebook that. Then you can kind of refigure it out. I think then Seth will probably have had surgery by then. Swelling, I would assume would have to have gone down in 3 weeks. Um, and so maybe they get in there and they go, okay, it's not as bad, or okay, maybe it is as bad. So if it is as bad, you know, maybe they give them a timeline. You know, maybe it's not. Um, I and who knows what this faction was supposed to be with Bronson and Braun. You know, obviously it's Paul Heyman. He's behind the scenes of all the greatest factions in most all WWE history, right?
Right.
So I think you can go a couple ways. I think you have to use this to put the strap on Braun's back. I think you have to use this to put the rocket on his back. You know, like they did with they did it with Edge, they did it with um CM Punk, with the Money in the Bank thing, like
Yeah.
using this as not as a I think the word is a MacGuffin, using this as a MacGuffin, so like kind of like put you in the next stratosphere. So
Mm-hmm.
one way you could do it, and this is kind of what the idea I kicked around with my dad, is that you could have Bronson and Braun versus Roman and Jay at SummerSlam. And then you start weaving the seeds of like, okay, we don't have Seth anymore. Who's leading who? And you do this like, well, I'm better because I'm younger. And I'm the, I'm the, I hear the dogs barking. Or you could go, well, I'm the what did Cole call him on Monday night? Uh,
The Oracle.
no, what did he call uh Bronson Reed? Uh the Aussie
Uh,
something. I'm trying to remember what he used it twice, and I'm like, that didn't sound right coming from Cole. It was like a
I
weird
forgot.
nickname. Yeah, like because he's from New Zealand. I thought I didn't think he was from Australia. I thought he was from New Zealand. I remember correctly, but what do I know? But that's what I thought. I thought he was from New Zealand, and they call him the Oz.
The Aussie. I know what you're talking about. I can't.
They said he was like an Aussie psychopath or something weird. And I'm like, and I couldn't remember what they called it, but I kind of like, what, Cole? There's sometimes where Michael Cole just says stuff, and I'm like, huh? And like Corey Graves is like reeling back in, and that's why I like Corey Graves too. He very much reminds me of Mike today. He knows his history.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you have this infighting between Braun and Bronson Reed, and then Heyman's like, well, boys, like let's wait until Seth gets back, and then maybe you slide Seth in, with a cast on his leg, and maybe they pick sides. Maybe Paul, maybe Heyman goes to Braun Breaker's side, and Seth Rollins goes to Bronson Reed's side. I don't know. I mean, it could go on all these different ways. And I know Seth Rollins always does well when he's in a faction. Think of him with uh, Buddy Murphy and I want to say it was Authors of Pain, right? That
Yeah.
was that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that
AOP.
before they were trying to get them away from Paul Ellering, which I don't think was a good idea because
Yeah.
Paul Ellering's a great manager, but I think Authors of Pain, that's a whole different story. But I don't know. You could go a couple different ways with this. You could definitely do that. You could definitely um you could you know you could have uh, him forfeited, I guess. If there's no real or you could go the Cody Rhodes in the Hell in a Cell route and like, well, the knee's blown out anyway. Let's put me in a 5-minute match and get squashed by somebody, and then it's for the
Yeah.
the Money in the Bank thing. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. The way I would, if the cards fall right, the way I would like to see it is another heist of the century between like Roman and Cody or John Cena. I think that was the original plan. Maybe was for for Seth to cash in on Cena or cash in on Cody, and then him and Cody can fight over it because I don't think they've had a championship match. I think they've always had singles matches and stuff like that when Seth was doing his little weird Joker thing. But I think that was the point. Maybe was to have the trilogy match of Cody and Cena in Boston towards the end of the year, and maybe that's when you have Seth cash in. I don't know. Now it's all up in the air, and you know I'm curious to see where this goes to.
Yeah, I think that if he's gone for a long time, I would like to see them strip it and, like you said, do another match at Clash at Paris. Um, put Braun Breaker in the match. Put maybe Jey Uso. I would put
Probably
Dominic Mysterio. I
got to
would
put Penta in there. Penta's kind of
get
in that main
Penta.
event. Then I
Definitely.
would say either Orton or LA Knight or Drew McIntyre. The thing is that you're starting to see a lot of the heels have been going down,
Yeah.
and so now it's you don't have even right now I can't think of any realistic person that you could put the belt on that's not an established vet already. Like I don't know, and we talked about what everybody's motivations are to be in the business, right? Some guys are going to be like, I hate to say it about Sammy, but like, I don't think Sammy ever truly wants to have the belt. I mean, you could be this character all you want and say, I've got to have that belt, but like, so many times they could have pulled the trigger on it and they didn't. Now, is that a writing problem? It could be. Is it a, what? I don't need the belt. I'm good with it. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. Who knows? Because that's where I think, that peeling back again, like we talked about with that upcoming show on Netflix. I don't know. It's all about what they want to do with it, and some people are just like, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm happy with my on air time. I'm happy, do being beat up all every week, like Tozawa. Like I'm cool with that. That's why I go with it. I truly think that there's this this relationship now that Triple H has with these guys that first of all, Triple H isn't going to put you in a position where you're going to lose. And I think that he knows the business too much. And I think he's been put in that position a couple times where, you know, unfortunately it's like it's gotta be you, Hunter, and we gotta punish somebody. And and I think it's less about that and more about like, okay, let's back this up and let's figure it out because it's what's the best for business. Now, Vince wasn't always like that. Vince wanted to kind of, poke at you and get under your skin and do some kind of mean shit to you. And I go back to like, the whole Miz having to eat in his fucking closet, go change in the men's bathroom in the arena. I'm like those are things that you just don't do anymore. Those they're we're in a society where it's what it's WWE. It's still a workplace. Like Vince found that out real quick recently. Like it's still a workplace. You can't be doing that shit all the time. And then that brings in questions of like, okay, what did he really write into WWE programming that was just Vince's sick stuff he wanted to see? And I go, that makes me think of, Trish Stratus barking like a dog. You
Oh
mean to tell me that a
yeah.
Hall of Famer, a current Hall of Famer, had to do that? Like, that's messed up. That's real messed up as a boss. Like, I don't, I've been in the food service industry for the last like 10 years, and I don't care who you are. If my boss ever made me do something that degraded me, but it was part of my job, no, sorry, I quit. I go back to a movie I watched, called Burnt, and it's a movie with Bradley Cooper, and he makes I think it's Omar Sy plays the sous chef, and he like undercooks a scallop or overcooks it or something, like, seasons the hell out of it, and makes it just nasty. And so he takes the scallop, puts it in a napkin, and keeps it in his pocket throughout service. And he opens it. He's like, "Would you eat this? Would you do this?" And he makes him eat it. That's kind of what I think Vince did a lot of times. So to your point about creative is, I don't think Triple H is going to put anybody on the roster out there that they're not going to be able to deliver what they're agreeing to do.
Yeah.
You still have to physically go out there and do it. You know, are you going to get heat for it sometimes if you don't do it correctly? Sure, things happen in wrestling. Obviously you got to pivot, but there's a there's a sense of duty that you have to have as you know, your creative control. But that's what Triple H is gonna have to do. He's gonna have to do his due diligence and make the right call.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. These I would say these next couple of weeks leading up to SummerSlam are gonna be interesting. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, or maybe sometime early next week, uh, the swelling goes down on Seth's knee, and they can really, figure out what's going on and how long he's gonna be out. But I got a feeling also that if he's only out for like a couple of months, if it's anywhere from 6 to 8 months, I could see him still keeping the briefcase. And when he comes back, that's when he's going to cash it in,
Yep.
whoever the champion is at that time.
Yep.
But
I think it'll be a total surprise. You know, I think you know, you'll hear the Seth Rollins music come, and then boom, the whole place will go, "Oh my God, he's back! Oh my God, we forgot he's cashing. Oh crap, he's cashing in. We forgot
yeah,
he had the briefcase." Yep.
yeah.
And I think it's the most logical solution that you can have.
And if I was Paul Heyman, like now, I wouldn't even walk around with the briefcase. Just get rid of it. You know what I'm saying?
Let him all forget about it.
Yeah, don't even give anybody that mystery to think like, well, what's Heyman doing with the briefcase? Is Seth really out and this and that? Because that's all they're gonna do is keep saying that he's not injured. It's a work. He'll be back in a couple of months or whatever. But no, this injury is legit, and it's like you said, like when he landed, you could tell that he popped something in that knee popped. It wasn't like his reaction to it was not a work. That's not a work. That was a straight injury right there. And
Right.
definitely hope that he has a speedy recovery and we can see him back in the ring soon.
Absolutely.
So it was a big weekend this past weekend. We had the Great American Bash, Saturday night's main event. We had AEW All In, and then this Sunday was Evolution, the all women's pay per view. Real quick, what was your favorite event out of that whole weekend?
Bar none evolution. I you know, to Triple H's point when he had the post show interviews, it doesn't need to be a every year thing. It doesn't need to be an every month thing, you know, but it's nice to showcase the women. It really is, you know, and you know, we talk about the evolution of the business. You're starting to see these women like Rhea and Io and, you know, Charlotte being on the top of her game. You're starting to see these women that they can go just as much as the men. And it's, you know, I think that, you know, like I said to my point about Trish Stratus, I think, you know, women were really hindered in that, like when they wanted to really start getting into it, Vince kept being that gatekeeper and saying no. And, you know, it it was more about what she looks like. And, you know, that's why we have, excuse me, that's why we have, you know, the women that looked good. But then we had started them having to kind of be able to wrestle. And, you know, I think that's where Trish started to try to break that mold was, you know, yeah, I was a fitness instructor, but I I could wrestle if I wanted to, question mark. And, you know, you had the Bellas that came in that kind of, you know, if I remember correctly, the Bellas were like they were in Scottsdale and they were like bar promotion managers. Like they were slapped on every country bar in town. That actually was just recently in Arizona a couple of years ago. And it was after they had retired. They were kind of retired by then, but they were on like almost every big bar in town had a picture of the Bellas. Now I don't know if that was just because that group or whatever, but like yeah, glamour models they look good. And they're, you know, wrestling has to be an aesthetic, right? But you're starting to see these women that can actually freaking flat out wrestle. You know, like Natty Neidhart, one of the last women to be in the dungeon, right? You know, and that's already a feat in itself. You don't have very many women that came from the dungeon, period. So to have women that really like truly want to wrestle, like Rio, like Rhea Ripley, like Io Sky, you know, like Asuka, you know, obviously Japanese wrestling is a little bit different over there, but you know, to have women that generally want to come in and wrestle, that's a different story. And I think you're starting to see that, you know, with not just as WWE as a whole, but like, you know, the whole thing that Tony Storm's got going on and in AEW, that whole art, like everything about her is just like breaking that mold of like what a traditional woman superstar is supposed to be. And I'm like, it's cringy because I'm like, I'm still getting used to like her, creaming herself and stuff like that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, like the stuff you can get away with on TV. I'm like, don't get me wrong, it's cringy, but it's cringy and like did she say that?
Yeah.
And so I love what Tony Storm is doing. I love what Rhea Ripley's. She's probably the third best wrestler in the world right now. And I'm not talking about just the women. She's the third best wrestler in the world behind Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. I I think Cody's a four, and I think Cena's kind of up there too. But Cena's doing a farewell tour. We're never gonna see him again. He's not on my radar, top 10 right now. But Rhea Ripley's definitely like I think she's the top three women's wrestler or any wrestler pound for pound in the world right now. And just everything about her is just amazing. And to see the different iterations that we've seen from Rhea being this tall, bubbly blonde, and to go into this mommy vibe, right? And so you're starting to see that evolution of part of the term, but women's wrestling is kind of starting to turn that corner again. And I think it started to turn that corner in 2017 when you had all these people, you had all these like legends that wanted to come back and make an impact. Now some of those people that started that women's revolution. Now this second evolution we're seeing is going to transcend all women's wrestling. It's going to be women's professional wrestling at this point, and it's going to be really hard to argue why they don't maybe they don't have more women's matches on a regular basis.
Yeah. Definitely. I would definitely say my favorite pay per view from last weekend was Evolution. Um, I definitely think that I wouldn't mind seeing it being like a yearly thing, but I think the demand for it has to be the demand has to be like, yo, we want this every year. That's the only way I see WWE doing it. My favorite part of the night was Naomi cashing in, being the women's world champion. I feel like she deserved it. A lot of she's put in a lot of work, especially with everything that she went through when her and Sasha Banks walked out. She went to TNA, became the champion over there, and then to come back a couple years back, do her thing with Jade Cargo and Bianca, and then being in that story, and then just that whole transition as a heel. She's my favorite heel right now, and just her promo on Raw was just hilarious. Like she was a straight heel on that promo on Raw, and I think that she's the hottest wrestler right now. And just me personally, and I've said this on previous episodes of my podcast, I think women's wrestling has been killing men's wrestling in the past couple of years. If you look at the big matches like War Games, Money in the Bank, the Royal Rumble, I would have to say that those women's matches have been better than the men's in the past couple of years. The only difference is with the men have better storylines than the women War Games matches. You get what I'm saying?
Right. And I think to your point, storyline. It's what can we create as a storyline? Now you can, my dad kind of has this thing where he really hates when they retread storylines. One of the ones that I hate the most is like, and I don't think WWE's done it in a really long time, but the getting arrested thing. I I've never really understood that. I get it in the past when when you couldn't go online and look up someone's booking information and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
like I think the best executed one they did recently was when Dom went to jail. I think that was funny. It was
yeah, yeah.
whatever he said was, I'm not gonna last in jail or bail me out or whatever he said. It was funny as hell. It was like, I'm too pretty for jail or
Yeah,
whatever he said. So those are like you gotta take certain storylines and they gotta be very well executed. And so I, I think because and I could be stay corrected, but I think that the lack of storylines is there's not a lot of history with the women. Like as far as deep-seated history, there really isn't. You know, you can create a storyline, obviously, and you can write it, for women, whatever. Um, but like some of them got to be edgy enough. But like I said, you also have to go with it, right? It still has to be approved by you as the town. And so I'll go I'll go into an indie promotion, right? I think I think this is Gigi Dolan, and I'd have to look this up. But I think if I remember, it was either I don't remember. I want to say it's Gigi Dolan now, but I remember in the Indies at least maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Do you remember there was an indie match where the oh, this is gonna be really cringy. So forewarning anybody, if you're not okay with cringy stuff, mute your mic or turn away. So I remember there was a match between two women on an indie show. I don't remember where, I couldn't tell you what promotion, but she pulled a tampon from her trunks. And obviously it was like food coloring and
Oh,
and yeah, do you remember what I'm talking about? She ended up in WWE. I can't remember if it was uh, Priscilla Kelly or Gigi Dolan, but like
that's the same person. That's the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
Oh.
she's in NXT. I think she's still in NXT.
No, she
Um,
got released a few months ago.
okay, then that's you. We're thinking of the same person because I can see her. I can see her indie name, but I can't remember it. But I
Yeah,
can
it
see
was
her.
Priscilla Kelly.
Yeah, and so it's things like that. Like, so we go back to current storylines. Is like I said, I love the timeless Tony Storm thing. She's doing this like women's empowerment, and I can be as gross and as vile and as sexually explicit as I want. But you have to. That's your character. If you're going to go that route, you're going to have to go that route fully. And so maybe the storylines don't match up because you're still developing women's wrestling as characters. Does that make sense? You're still
Yeah,
trying to develop what the behind the scenes is. I mean, they can crush it all they want on the physical end of on the spectrum. That's great. The stories where it's really going to be interesting. And
yeah,
so, I think, like I said, we're seeing this meta version of storylines. Is like maybe it's less about the storyline and more about the wrestling. And I think you're starting to see that as a whole because I mean, what's more watched in you'd have to go through WWE's archives. What's more watched, actual matches or backstage promos? What's more watched, moments or actual matches?
mm,
And you have to kind of figure out what are people really putting their eyes on. And I would say for the most part, it's the actual wrestling with women. We don't care about the storylines. I'd like to see it, sure, but all that's going to do is just marinate on the better wrestling.
yeah. Definitely, definitely. So one last question before we get up out of here. Of course, we saw on Monday the OTC is back. Roman Reigns. He came out and helped Jey Uso, and of course, it looked like it's going to be Roman and Jey versus Braun and Bronson at SummerSlam. What are your thoughts on his return? What do you see? Where you see Roman going beyond this tag match that they it's not official, but that's what it looks like is leading to. So, what are your
You know,
thoughts on Roman coming back?
we haven't seen Roman truly by himself in a very, very long time.
Mm.
We haven't seen Roman by himself since I want to say since before before COVID. So
Yep.
this is like 4 or 5 years. We haven't seen Roman just out there solo without without the bloodline. Obviously the bloodline is going to be there, and you can't undo Jey Uso being there as his cousin. You can't undo it, right?
Yeah.
There's gonna come a time, and I don't know if it's gonna be sooner or later, but they're gonna have to separate Jey and Roman. And I don't know if they ever will now. I don't know because of the nature of it being a family business. I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna look. But Roman's gonna have to like pick up on this like solo thing. He's gonna have to do it on his own at some point. And I think you've got to pull the trigger on turning him. He's gotta be a face now. I don't think I
Oh,
don't think there's
yeah.
I don't think there's enough heel. I think there's too many heels right now. And my people I talked to said, well, there's gotta be the heels to give you something to chase. Well, now Roman's back, and after he deals with Jay and Bronson and Braun, I think the logical thing is him and Punk. you know, I realistically think that you took the belt off of Jay to put it on to Gunther to let CM Punk take it and run with it for a little bit, just to say he had won a championship back in his second run. And
Mhm.
then Roman, maybe you have Roman be his first big test. You know, maybe Roman's his test at in Perth, you know, in Australia. Maybe that's his first, you know, but maybe that's the big mega match that we have down in Perth is, you know, Punk and Roman. 'Cause I don't think we've ever had a Punk and Roman match. I maybe
I
we
don't
did
think so.
recently,
Nope.
but no, nothing high stakes. Might have had it on a Monday Night Raw when Roman was still with Shield, but you know, I don't think we have. And so to see that with CM Punk and Roman, that might be your Perth match. You know, honestly, if I'm going that route, or you know, you could go the route of Gunther and Roman. That could be also a very good route to go to. And you
Mm.
know, maybe you start to plant the seeds for Gunther being the future of that company. And you know, Gunther's still pretty young. You know, obviously he's been around for a while, and he's won at every level he's been into. But you know, Roman's starting to get to be where Cena was at that age. You know, he's you know, kind of starting to get there where Roman's already won quite enough. Maybe Roman's starting to give back. Maybe Roman's starting to be that guy. It's like, you know what? I'm going to be the tribal chief. I don't need no titles. I'm going to start making all this talent better. And realistically, other than, other than Roman and Cody and Cena, we don't have many massive over talents. You know, it's just we don't. And we talked about the Attitude Era. There was a there was a times where you could watch a Monday Night Raw and there'd be a championship match, and you could be like, dude, I bet you that guy's winning. And
Yeah.
they pull a swerve, they do something, and you know, so you don't see many of that in this time of age. But I think that's what draws me to the product is that it's who's going to step up to the plate next.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think it's gonna be interesting with Roman, even after this tag match. If it is a tag match at SummerSlam with Roman and Jay against Braun and Bronson, I could see maybe a one-on-one match between Roman and Braun, maybe Clash at the Castle or whatever pay-per-view they create in September. I don't think it's necessarily over. I say that this feud could maybe stretch on another 2 months, 2, 3 months, something like that. I hope somewhere down the line we do get to see Roman and Gunther. If it's I hope Gunther whoops CM Punk, and I don't dislike CM Punk or anything like that, but Gunther should whoop him up like he do everybody else. Smack him on his chest, make his chest red, all that stuff that he does. He should give that same punishment to CM Punk. I really don't think Punk needs the title. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You think so?
No, to your point, I don't think he needs to have the title, but I think maybe giving him the title is kind of like that final validation of like Punk, here we go. We're giving you everything you wanted. You know, I'm still waiting on the ice cream bars. I'm still waiting on those things, man. And maybe that's the last thing he gets is the ice cream bars. But no, I don't. To your point, I don't think he needs it. And yeah, I think Gunther gets to make an example of him. And I think CM Punk shows up and is that gritty, blue collar kind of guy. And I think that's what you have him, that's why it's such a good matchup. But I don't think you have to give it to him. But if it was the only way that you needed to get the belt off of Jay to give it to Gunther is to give it to Punk, I think that's maybe a thing too. But I don't see them doing that as much anymore. They don't do. They're not. They're gonna. It's not. They're not trying to build ways to take belts off of people anymore. They're trying to create a better story. And so I think that might be a better story is that Punk loses to Gunther.
Yeah,
But you never know. And with this whole Seth Rollins thing, who knows? Maybe Seth was supposed to cash in on Gunther and Goldberg. And it
yeah,
because that didn't happen either. So
yeah, definitely, definitely. Sean, I appreciate you stopping by, coming on the show, talking wrestling. It was
absolutely.
definitely had a good time. Real quick before we get out of here, was there any thing that you wanted to plug? Anywhere that you wanted the people to find you on social media?
So I run a company called High Spots Hospitality. I'm a chef consultant for a number of companies here in West Michigan. Think of Bar Rescue, but before the Bar Rescue, before John Tevert comes in. I can be found at highspotshospitality.com. You can also look up me on Instagram and Facebook. If you see a bar in need or a restaurant that isn't doing so well, that needs a little bit of a brand refresh, or needs some staff retraining, or just I know we're in kind of an economy where it's hard to go to a restaurant. It's hard to go out to a bar now. You want to save your money. But it's also harder for bar owners. I know one of my friends in town just recently had to close his bar and had to announce his bar closing this morning. So I want to see less bars close down and more bars kind of scrape by, because the local watering hole is kind of your place to go to, kind of like your salvation. When you're not having a good day, when you're celebrating life's little wins, you go to the local neighborhood bar, you go to the neighborhood pub, you grab that cheap, crappy $5 sandwich, you eat that greasy burger and drink your pint of beer for like $8, and you have these places of community. So High Spots Hospitality, I can be found, like I said, on Instagram and Facebook. If you are a bar owner or a bar manager or a restaurant owner or a restaurateur, that you just need a little boost, you need a little help, come find me, and I'll consultations are always free. I can always see what you got working with, and drop me a line, and maybe we'll make some magic and turn your stuff around and help you get back on your feet.
Sweet, sweet. That's what's up. So real quick before I get out of here, just want to let everybody know that for the next 2 weeks, there will not be a Wrestling from the 313 show. I'm taking a little break for 2 weeks. I will be back in August 5th. Tuesday and Wednesday we got a show, and the 12th and the 13th. And I think starting after the show on the 13th, I think I'm just going to do one show a week, probably just Tuesdays. We'll see about that, but yeah, we're taking a little vacation, enjoy the summer a little bit, take care of some personal stuff or whatever. But yeah, I'll still be on social media, posting, talking wrestling, all that good stuff. And if you want to find Wrestling from the 313, just go on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter/X. Most importantly, YouTube. Make sure you go to YouTube. Make sure you check out some videos. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We are at 6,500 subscribers on YouTube. So we trying to get the numbers up, trying to get to that 10,000K mark. So if you're watching, make sure, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And always want to end my show, like always, support wrestling podcasters, and of course support independent wrestling, and just support the whole IWC. Shout out to everyone in the IWC, that's podcasting, doing content creating, referees, wrestlers, everybody, fans like Sean here that just love to come on podcast and talk wrestling. So once again, Sean, I thank you for coming on. I'm your host, Mike D. This is Wrestling from the 313, and I will see you in August 5th. Peace.